Good evening. Back in the early 90s, then Prime Minister Narasimha Rao coined the famous Look East policy. Now, 20 years later, the Modi government has rephrased it to Act East. But beyond all this fancy jargon, where really does India's engagement with Southeast Asia stand? We explore this on the news tonight as the Prime Minister begins his first trip to Myanmar. But first, as always, the headlines. Prime Minister Narendra Modi arrives in Myanmar. He meets President Thein Sein to kick off a string of interactions with over 40 world leaders in the next 10 days. Tragedy strikes a mass sterilization camp in Chhattisgarh. 8 women die and more than 50 are hospitalized after surgeries go horribly wrong. The Maharashtra Assembly will take up a crucial trust vote tomorrow. The Shiv Sena in Congress now make it a 3-way contest for the Speaker's post. All eyes now on what the NCP is going to do. And the APEC summit comes to an end in Beijing. This is big. Members agree to work towards a new free trade zone, which is being piloted by China, the FTAAP. Our top story tonight. Prime Minister Narendra Modi started his 10-day three-nation tour today. He arrived in the capital of Myanmar, Naypyidaw, where he met with President Thein Sein. Modi will attend the ASEAN-India as well as the East Asia Summit. On the sidelines of these summits, he will meet with some of the most powerful men and women of Asia as his government once again focuses on the extended neighborhood.
Shortly after his arrival at the Naypyidaw airport, Prime Minister Narendra Modi reached the presidential palace where he was given a guard of honor. After his meeting with President Thein Sein, Modi tweeted, "Very good meeting with President Thein Sein. We had extensive discussions covering various aspects of our bilateral relations."
Interest levels of Indian industry, India Inc. in Myanmar has really increased over the past, I'd say since 2011-2012. After the process of review of sanctions took place, and that is when really our company started feeling that this is a country in which we should be looking at with greater interest. So all said and done, this is a relationship which is on the up, and we hope to be able to make a lot of progress over the next few months.
In a 45-minute meet, both leaders are reported to have discussed issues relating to trade.
Bilateral trade is well below potential. In fact, this was also raised by President Thein Sein and Prime Minister. Both felt, given that we are neighbors, bilateral trade, which is approximately 2 billion, is too low. There is potential for growing.
It was the first of the meetings that Modi will be having with over 40 world leaders in the course of the next 10 days. A key highlight will be his interaction with Chinese Premier Li Keqiang on the sidelines of the East Asia Summit.
The Prime Minister will also be meeting his Chinese counterpart, Premier Li Keqiang, at Naypyidaw.
Modi is expected to make a strong pitch to enhance regional connectivity at the one-day 12th annual ASEAN-India Summit that starts on Wednesday. Modi will also be meeting Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, South Korean President Park Geun-hye, and Singaporean President Tony Tan at the summit in Myanmar. Akhilesh Suman's report for Rajya Sabha TV.
Okay, so where do our relations with Myanmar and, as an extension to the rest of Southeast Asia, stand right now, 20 years after Look East, and what's expected to come out of this visit by Prime Minister Narendra Modi? Suhasini Haider is the diplomatic editor of The Hindu. She's now joining us live on the news tonight. Thein Sein was the only head of state in this region, in our extended neighborhood, who was not invited to Prime Minister Narendra Modi's inauguration back in May. This first visit by the Prime Minister to Myanmar, and of course he'll be attending the ASEAN-India Summit and then the East Asia Summit there. Will this make up for that? I mean, what is expected to be achieved in this visit?
Well, let's remember that India-Myanmar relations have always been seen from the prism of very high potential, but then somehow that potential has not worked out on the ground. Whether it has been the idea of connectivity, whether it has been the idea of commerce, and cultural ties as well. We've always lagged behind what is the potential between these two countries. And you're absolutely right, President Thein Sein was not included in the invitation to SAARC leaders as well as to Mauritius. And perhaps many had felt that he should have been, because this is part of India's Bay of Bengal outreach as well as its Look East policy. And of course, Myanmar is the gateway really for India to East Asia.
And the problem with our Myanmar policy ever since the breakthrough visit that former Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi made there in '87 is that our relations with Myanmar are somehow always seen from the prism of the China-Myanmar relationship, and our relation, for want of a better phrase, it pales in comparison to China's engagement with Myanmar. Is that the right way of looking at this relationship, or should we be focusing on other areas where we're good at?
I think absolutely we should be looking and playing to our own strengths. If we are trying to compete with China when it comes to development aid to these countries, when it comes to building those big ticket projects, I think we will always be looking from the prism of comparing, which is not a good way to be. Instead, we should play to our strengths with Myanmar. And what are those? The ancient ties between these two countries are probably the most ancient in the region in some ways. The fact that we have the possibility of these linkages, these road linkages between the two countries. You know, I was talking about the potential not being reached between India and Myanmar. Even today, if you want to fly from most parts of India to Myanmar, you would have to go via another country. There are a few flights that go, but they are not regular flights. You also don't really have the kind of connectivity on the roads. The border infrastructure needs a lot of development. The ports, the plan for that Kaladan multimode transport project between Myanmar and India, this is why it's so critical that it should be completed, because it would connect Kolkata to the Sitwe harbour as well. So there are all kinds of plans that we could work on. Agriculture is a huge field. Remember, we get a lot of our imports when it comes to pulses from Myanmar, and yet we don't really have a cold chain process between the two countries that can be built.
What about Myanmar as an extension, or like you said, a gateway to Southeast Asia? Again, performing well below potential.
Absolutely. To begin with, just the bilateral trade, as the foreign ministry spokesperson said over there, is under $2 billion between the two countries. This is very low for the potential it could, it could be when it comes to the fact that Myanmar is a trade route, if you like, to Southeast Asia, and certainly was in other times. Also, our infrastructure with Myanmar becomes an important link for improving the infrastructure in the northeast of India. And we must always be conscious of that, that there are many parts of the northeast that could benefit from this kind of trade between the two countries. And then, as you pointed out, opening out to the east, the trilateral highway between Thailand, Myanmar and India, which I think is going to make some progress during this visit as well, is a critical key to that.
Of course, Myanmar is a huge part of BIMSTEC as well as the BCIM corridor. We'll see how that plays out. But thanks very much, Suhasini Haider, diplomatic editor of The Hindu, joining us on the news tonight. Meanwhile, more domestic stories now. In an unfortunate incident in Chhattisgarh, at least 11 women have died and dozens are critical after undergoing a mass sterilization surgery at a camp in Bilaspur. Now, this camp was organized by the state government of Chhattisgarh. Here's what went wrong.
A mass sterilization camp in Bilaspur turned into a massive tragedy on Tuesday. Medical negligence killed 11 women and left dozens more battling for life.
लगभग 55 महिलाएं हैं जिनका तकलीफ की जानकारी मिली है और माननीय मुख्यमंत्री महोदय ने ऑलरेडी जांच के आदेश दिया है। एक मेडिकल टीम रायपुर से रवाना हो गया है, मेडिकल डायरेक्टर भी आ रहे हैं।
The incident led to massive protests by the families of the deceased. The opposition Congress demanded the immediate resignation of State Chief Minister Raman Singh and Health Minister Amar Agarwal for the incident.
तो हम मांग करते हैं कि हेल्थ मिनिस्टर को तुरंत बर्खास्त करना चाहिए। वैसे तो इतने कांडों के बाद मुख्यमंत्री का इस्तीफा ही बनता है।
Other political leaders and social activists also sought adequate compensation for families of the victims.
It is an indication and also a commentary on the extreme callousness of the authorities of that state.
How can it happen? And in this incident, government should immediately conduct a thorough inquiry, and the government should check verify the credentials of those doctors who have conducted this procedure.
The state government suspended 4 health officials, including the chief medical officer of Bilaspur, and ordered a high-level probe. The Union Health Ministry also constituted a 5-member panel to ascertain the cause of the deaths. An FIR was registered against the doctors. Prime Minister Narendra Modi asked Chhattisgarh Chief Minister Raman Singh to thoroughly investigate and take quick action in the case.
क्योंकि ये शासकीय कार्यक्रम में हुआ है, नेग्लिजेंसी से हुआ है, उनको परिवार को ज़्यादा आश्वस्त करने की दृष्टि से उन्हें बेहतर मदद कैसे मिल सकता है, तो 4 लाख रुपया प्रति जो मृतक परिवार के राशि देने का भी निर्णय लिया गया है। और पीड़ित परिवार जो आज एडमिट है, जिनका इलाज चल रहा है, जो घर बार छोड़ के पूरा परिवार यहाँ है, उन प्रत्येक परिवारों को पूरी इलाज की व्यवस्था सरकार के माध्यम से होगा।
News reports said the women are all residents of the neighboring villages in Bilaspur. Most of them are from BPL families. They were discharged soon after surgery on Saturday, but as their condition worsened, they were referred to the Bilaspur District Hospital on Monday. Bureau Report, Rajya TV.
In Maharashtra, the minority BJP government will face a crucial floor test tomorrow. The party is expected to win the floor test with the help of the NCP, of course, but the standoff continues between the former allies, the BJP and the Shiv Sena. A day after claiming stake for the leader of opposition post, the Shiv Sena has put up its own candidate today for the post as well. However, Chief Minister Devendra Fadnavis has called on all parties to ensure unopposed election of the speaker. The BJP also saying it's ready to welcome the support of all parties except the Congress to ensure that they reach the majority mark. Meanwhile, the Sena, after a meeting today of its newly elected legislators, was tight-lipped about what exactly its strategy is going to be on the floor tomorrow.
Anyone and all of those who want to support in the development of Maharashtra will accept their support. May not be possible to include them in the government, and we'd like Shiv Sena to come along with us.
From the political process in Maharashtra to the one in Delhi, where the Supreme Court today dismissed the Aam Aadmi Party's petition seeking the dissolution of the Delhi Assembly. This after the centre informed the court that a decision had already been taken on this issue. The 5-judge Constitution Bench of the Apex Court, headed by the Chief Justice H.L. Dattu, delivered a brief order on this issue. It said the Election Commission will now decide what the schedule of the elections are going to be.
When this question arose as to whether a direction or some observation needs to be given regarding holding the elections expeditiously, the court observed that this is now the domain of the Election Commission and obviously things would be done. Also, this legal issue about whether the court can issue a direction directing the government to dissolve the assembly, they said this question, legal question or constitutional question, would be kept open to be decided when such an issue arises in future.
Elections in Delhi, elections also in Jammu and Kashmir, and a day after the Prime Minister's meeting with Sajjad Lone, which sparked off rumours about a possible tie-up, the BJP and the People's Conference, which is Mr. Lone's party, came out today saying that they will contest the elections alone. Lone met Modi yesterday, during which the two were believed to have discussed the possibility of working together after the elections in Jammu and Kashmir. The meeting comes after Lone had consultations both with BJP as well as RSS, leaders like Ram Madhav and JP Nadda. However, Lone ruled out any talks of an alliance at this point. He claimed that the meeting was about relief and rehabilitation of the flood victims in Jammu and Kashmir.
Election on its own and purely on the basis of its own strength. There has been no official alliance so far with any party.
हम तो इलेक्शन अकेले लड़ रहे हैं, लिस्ट आउट हो गई है, हर जगह हमारे जो हैं कैंडिडेट्स अपने। हमने सिर्फ रिलीफ के बारे में चाहा कि जो ये पिछले मेरे ख्याल 100-150 साल में ऐसा वर्स्ट फ्लड आया है, इसमें नीड है कि सेंटर इंटरवीन करे, even more actively.
Meanwhile, the Gujarat government's controversial bill making voting compulsory in local body polls now face severe criticism from the opposition. As per that bill, any person not voting in the local body elections would be liable for penal action as well as for punishment. Opposition parties claim the bill is absurd. It's challenged the feasibility of punishing such a large section of offenders. However, the ruling BJP in Gujarat claims it's simply an initiative to try and encourage voters to turn out in even bigger numbers.
कभी-कभी लोग वोट नहीं भी करते, कभी 70% लोग भी वोट नहीं करते, 50% भी लोग वोट नहीं करते, तो क्या आप ये 50% लोगों को जेल में डाल पाओगे?
गुजरात मैं मानता हूं कि देश में प्रथम राज्य है जिसने इस तरह का कायदा पारित किया है, और ये कायदा पारित करने से बाकी की चीजें स्वयं स्पष्ट नहीं हो जाती। इसके लिए इसके रूल्स बनाने होंगे, जो सबऑर्डिनेट लेजिस्लेचर का काम है, और रूल्स बनेंगे तब पता चलेगा कि क्या प्रावधान होने वाले हैं।
More news from right across the country in Nationwide. Pakistan on Tuesday violated the ceasefire for the second time in 3 days, this in the Uri sector in Jammu and Kashmir. The Indian side claims that it responded appropriately. In a similar exchange of fire Saturday, a soldier and a civilian were killed in unprovoked firing from the other side. Former Union Minister G.K. Vasan, who broke away from the Congress, will launch his party in Tiruchi on the 28th of November. Addressing his supporters in Chennai, Vasan said the ideology and policies of the new party will be revealed at this conference. He also promised to give positions of power to women in his new party. The Kolkata police today said a preliminary probe indicated no evidence of a bomb blast in Burdwan yesterday. A minor blast took place at a CRPF camp which houses the office of the National Investigation Agency, which is probing the earlier Burdwan blast. Police feel crackers could have been used by someone just to create mischief. We're going to take a break here in the program. When we come back, a court in South Korea sends the captain of the Ferry Seoul to 36 years in jail for gross negligence in the disaster which killed more than 300. That and other international stories when the News Tonight returns. Welcome back. You're watching the News Tonight. The Congress Party has convened an international conference here in Delhi to commemorate the 125th birth anniversary of Pandit Nehru. More than 50 leaders from different countries have confirmed their participation. 12 other political organizations will also take part in what is a two-day event.
Congress has decided to celebrate the 125th birth anniversary of the country's first Prime Minister, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, on a grand scale. A two-day international conference has been organized by the party in the national capital on Nehru's worldview and legacy.
The New Delhi conference, as we are going to call it, has the theme Nehru's worldview and his legacy, democracy, inclusion and empowerment. ये प्रश्न कहा कि क्या प्रधानमंत्री को बुलाया, मैंने कहा जी हमने कोई निमंत्रण नहीं भेजा। जी ये प्रधानमंत्री जी को भी समझना चाहिए, 31 को भी याद रखें और 14 नवंबर को भी याद रखें कि जवाहरलाल नेहरू क्या थे।
The party said it has received confirmation from 55 leaders across the world, including former heads of the state and delegations from 12 international political organizations for their participation. A 9-member delegation led by Party Vice President Rahul Gandhi will represent Congress at the conference. A website dedicated to this event was also launched by the party. It displays a lot of material related to Nehru, including his speeches and articles. Vishal Dhaya, Rajya Sabha TV, Delhi.
International news now, and the APEC summit came to an end in China, with members agreeing to move towards a new free trade zone, which is strongly being pushed by Beijing. It's called the Free Trade Area of the Asia-Pacific, seen as a rival by many to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is being pushed by the United States. The TPP, of course, excludes China. Chinese President Xi Jinping described the endorsement of the pact as a historic decision. In the final communique, APEC said an initial study into the establishment of the FTAAP would last a couple of years.
我们决定启动亚太自由贸易区进程，这是我们朝着实现亚太自由贸易区方向迈出的历史性一步。 标志着亚太自由贸易区进程的正式启动。
Meanwhile, in South Korea, the captain of the Ferry will spend a good part of the rest of his life in jail, sending Captain Lee Chong-suk to more than 30 years in prison for negligence. The court accepted that he did not intend to kill, thus acquitting him of the death penalty. Emotional outbursts were seen outside the courthouse, with distraught relatives calling him a murderer.
Cries of anguish and anger, greeting the acquittal of the captain of the South Korean ferry from the more serious charge of homicide and death penalty.
모두가 사형에 처해지게 해달라고 수없이 빌고 빌었습니다. 저들의 앞길에 우리 아이들이 겪었던 고통을 다 합친 것과 같은 고통이 닥치기를 빌었습니다. 하지만 우리나라 법은 그들에게 고작 5년, 끼케야 30년 정도.
저희 가족들은 검찰의 이 사건 판결에 대해서 항소를 하여 피고인들이 합당한 처벌을 받을 수 있게 해달라고 강력히 요청합니다.
The court held Lee Jun-suk guilty of gross negligence and sentenced him to 36 years in prison. The judges didn't hold him solely responsible for the tragedy that led to more than 300 deaths.
이준석 선장에게는
여러 가지 점들을 고려해서 법정 최고형인 36년이 선고된 것이라고 보시면 되겠습니다.
But the court convicted the chief engineer of murder and for deserting the passengers crying for help. He was jailed for 30 years. 13 other crew members were sentenced up to 20 years on charges including abandonment and violating maritime law. The owner of the ferry disappeared soon after the disaster and was later found dead. The disaster has been blamed on a combination of illegal redesigns, overloading of cargo, and an inexperienced crew. Hours before the verdict, the South Korean government called off the search for bodies in the vessel, which sank on 16th April. Bureau Report, Sabha TV.
Talks between the United States, Iran and the European Union on Iran's nuclear program failed to produce any breakthrough. These countries have been racing against time to meet a deadline of 24th November to try and strike an agreement. But at the end of the talks, all three parties said there's still a lot more left to be done. Iran, the United States and the European Union ended 2 days of high-level talks on Tehran's nuclear program. For the last couple of days, the US and Iran sought to overcome deep differences, allay mutual suspicions, and bring 12 months of diplomatic brinkmanship to the point of a breakthrough. But there is no immediate sign that they've bridged the gaps ahead of a November 24th deadline for an agreement. Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said no progress had been made in these talks. The US says there is still time left.
The discussions have been tough, direct, and serious. And as you know, the political directors will continue to stay in Oman for a yet to be determined amount of time. They'll be reconvening, of course, for the already announced round of meetings that are next week in Europe.
The key sticking point is thought to be the number and type of uranium-enriching centrifuges that Iran should be allowed to keep. The US wants Iran to meet its obligations to get relief from heavy economic sanctions. US Vice President Joe Biden reiterated that America will not let Iran build up nuclear weapons capability.
I've heard so much malarkey about our position on Iran. Let me say it to you clearly, in Biden-esque way. We will not let Iran acquire a nuclear weapon, period.
So now all eyes will be on Vienna next week for a last-ditch push to meet the November 24th deadline. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. More international news from across the globe in Global Buzz. In Pakistan, at least 56 people were killed and several others injured when a passenger bus collided with a truck in the southern province of Sindh. Those killed included 21 women and 18 children. The bus was headed to Karachi from the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province when it collided with a truck in Sukur in Sindh. The injured were shifted to hospitals in Sukur as well as in Khairpur. The battle for the strategic town of Kobani in Syria continued Tuesday, where Kurdish rebels and Islamist militants have been fighting for almost 2 months now. Kobani has become a test of the US-led coalition's ability to halt the advance of the Islamic State. The town is one of few areas in Syria where it can coordinate airstrikes with operations by an effective ground force. The American doctor Craig Spencer, who became the first person in New York City to be diagnosed with Ebola, has been declared free of the virus. He will be soon released from hospital. Spencer, who worked with Médecins Sans Frontières in Guinea, tested positive for Ebola back on the 23rd of October after he returned to the States. All right, we're going to take a break here in the program. When we come back, all the sports stories, including Vishwanathan Anand makes a stunning turnaround in the third game of the World Chess Championship against Magnus Carlsen. We'll get you the details when the News Tonight returns. Welcome back to the News Tonight. All the sports stories coming up in Sports Beat. Vishwanathan Anand made a comeback today in the World Chess Championship by defeating Norway's Magnus Carlsen in Game 3. Playing with white, Anand managed to avenge his defeat in Game 2. In the first game, Anand had drawn a marathon opener and he went down tamely in the second. Both players are now tied at 1.5 points each. Saina Nehwal will lead the Indian Challenge in the China Open Super Series, which will be held in Fuzhou. World Championship bronze medalist PV Sindhu will miss the tournament because of illness. Saina will start her campaign against the world number 15 Sayaka Takahashi of Japan. The Indian men's hockey team returned to a rousing welcome after its historic 3-1 series win against world champions Australia. The team put up a stupendous show, winning 3 consecutive games after losing the first match. The Indian team will next feature in the Champions Trophy, which will be held in Bhubaneswar from the 6th to the 14th of December. And in tennis, world number 1 Novak Djokovic began his title defense of the ATP World Tour Finals with a rather comfortable win against Marian Cilic. Chasing a 3rd straight title at the O2 Arena, Djokovic demolished the US Open champion 6-1, 6-1 in just 56 minutes flat. Djokovic joined Stanislav Wawrinka at the top of the group, or this is Group A we're talking about, after the Swiss defeated Thomas Berdych by the same score, 6-1, 6-1. And that's a wrap of the news tonight, this Tuesday edition. From me, Zaka Jacob, and the rest of the team, thanks for your time. Good night.